She is an American television writer, best known for her work on classic series such as MASH, Hill Street Blues, Moonlighting, Judging Amy, and The Good Wife. She has been nominated for 7 Emmy Awards and 6 Writer Guild of America Awards and many others. She's also the author of a new book out on May 21st, The Sound of Silence, The Life and Canceling of a Heroic Jesuit Priest. Please welcome Karen Hall to the program. Karen, great to see you. Before we discuss your new book, I'd like to ask you about your other works. I mean, you're best known for your work on MASH and Hill Street Blues and some of the shows I mentioned. How has your Catholic faith influenced those works, and were you always Catholic?
No, I was not. I converted. I fell in love with the church in high school, but I didn't join until 1994.
Wow.
And my first, I had about 35 years in show business, and my first 20, I was a, liberal, bleeding heart, the whole program. They were very happy with me. And then after I converted, they became less happy with me. Although when I first converted, it was during a period of time when spirituality was cool, and they considered Christianity part of that. So that was when Touched by an Angel and I can't remember, there were some other shows like that. And so when I started on Judging Amy, which my sister was running, I didn't want to do it, and she got me to do it by saying, "I'll let you do the God episode." And so I did. I was very happy with the God episode. And then I ended up staying for 5 years. But, there were a few jobs that I got because of it. But then I reached a point where kind of the world changed, and I would start to lose jobs because of it. And that's pretty much been the last decade.
Wow. You wrote for network television really during its golden age.
I did.
In the 70s, 80s, 90s. What are your impressions of the TV industry now in the age of Netflix and Amazon? Do you think it's as good as it was back then?
There are some shows that are just as good as it gets. They aren't necessarily PG rated shows, but Succession was really good. The Sopranos, I thought, was one of the best shows in the history of television. And the man who created it was one of my mentors. So,
really?
But these days, the reason I stopped doing staff work is because the last 3 meetings I went to, I pitched my ideas and I got the same note at all 3, and it was, it's not salacious enough. And so I said, there's just no place for me in television anymore. I'm writing my own projects and trying to sell them, and that's what I'll be doing from now on.
The book, The Sound of Silence, which you're about to release, is really the memoir of a friendship, specifically the story of your friendship with Father Paul MANKOWSKI, a Jesuit in the Chicago province who passed away in September of 2020. Tell us who Father Paul MANKOWSKI was and how he touched your life, Karen.
All right. And first I'll tell you the Flannery O'Connor quote that if I could say it in 25 words, I wouldn't have written a book. But he's very, very hard to describe because he was really so many things, and many of them didn't go together. So he was brilliant. If you ever asked anybody about him, if they knew him, the word that was going to come out of their mouth was brilliant, because, we throw that word around a lot, but he really was. He was exceedingly faithful. He was, a Jesuit's Jesuit back when that meant a thing. And he spoke about 13 languages, half of which were dead. So, I can talk about a scholar, the scholar he was for a long time, but the thing that made everybody surprised by him is that he could talk to you about ancient Semitic languages in one breath and then talk to you about bass fishing in the next. We talked about bass fishing and NASCAR and football and all sorts of things you wouldn't think a scholar would know anything about. He was just, he never talked down to people who weren't as smart as he was. He was always meeting people.
You all became close friends and had regular correspondence. That is what the marrow of this book is. It really is the unseen communications and thoughts of Father Paul Mankowski after he fell out of favor with the Jesuits and was silenced. Tell us what happened, and why did you feel you needed to offer this to the public now?
Okay, the short version of what led to it was that he was telling too much of the truth. And he got into trouble with the Jesuits when he tried to write an article about Pedro Arrupe, their Father General, that would forgive him for letting Robert Drinan, the Jesuit congressman, run for Congress, because, as you probably remember, he ran as a Democrat and he was very much in favor of abortion. And so Paul was trying to prove that this was an American construction and that Padre Arrupe did not have any guilt in it. But when he started to research it, he found out that that was not true. It was very much a don't do that, wink, wink. And so he decided, he had researched to write an article about this, and he decided he couldn't write it because what he thought was true was not true. He gave it to James Hitchcock, who's a church historian, just so he'd have the research. And then years later, Robert Drinan started talking about, he spoke out in favor of the partial birth, the ban on partial birth abortion. He was siding with Bill Clinton about, not banning partial birth abortion. And so since he was in the news again, James Hitchcock decided that it was time to tell that story. So he wrote the story, and he told Paul that he'd leave him out of it, and Paul said he didn't want that to be the case. So he wrote that a Harvard graduate student, Paul Mankowski, had given him this research. And the Jesuits went nuts because, they were very proud of their Jesuit congressman. They didn't want him to lose being a representative. And they accused Paul of stealing his research. And to this day, they'll tell you that he stole the research, and it's not true. He asked the archivist if he could have the research, and the archivist said, sure, because, why not? And it wasn't until they realized that he was going to use it to say something unfavorable against their very liberal Father General that it became a problem. And they silenced him not long after that. For about a decade before that, he had been writing articles that I'm sure they were not thrilled with. But that was what they used to officially silence him.
So Paul Mankowski is silenced by the order. Yet you were communicating with him via email over many years. Why do you feel you have to release this now? Why was it important for you to not only capture who Father Mankowski was, but to share his thoughts that were really shared with you in his own silence?
Well, while we were writing to each other for years and years, I would just realize that I had in his emails just gems of little essays on many topics that people would be interested in that they weren't hearing from him because he was not allowed to write. And so I thought I would like to be able to get those to more people. I also wanted to have people know who he is. A lot of people, when I would talk about him, had never heard of him, and that's because the Jesuits made sure no one heard of him. A lot of what he was writing is stuff that would really be perfect for the time and place we find ourselves in right now, because he was very faithful. People called him rigid. He was rigidly attached to the timeless magisterium of Holy Mother Church. And he didn't have a lot of wiggle room there. But the other reason that I wanted to let people read what he had written in my emails was just that you get to see what a wonderful person he was, and how funny and how bright and how faithful. And I thought that it would be good for people to know that a priest like this lived, because he really was, he's as close as I'll ever see to holy on this earth. And when he died, I had to get in a line of people who were putting their rosaries on his chasuble in the coffin. I'm not the only one who thought he was a saint.
And his, as I remember we spoke about this at one point, his computer disappeared after he passed away. So
Yes.
you really are the only person who had record of all these communications.
Yes, and I remember my spiritual director, who had been a Jesuit, said at one time, he said, the most sought-after object in Jesuitdom is Paul Mankowski's hard drive. And I said to him, well, that's all on my hard drive now. And I was thinking about that later. Before Paul died, I thought, if Paul dies before me, I'm going to unsilence him because I don't have a vow of obedience to the Jesuits. And he's somebody that it would do people so much good right now in this time of thorough confusion to hear his voice.
Well, and hear it they shall. The Sound of Silence, The Life and Canceling of a Heroic Jesuit Priest by Karen Hall is available at bookstores everywhere and online. Karen, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.